This is the Arrowhead Addict Top 50 Chiefs players of all time. This week, we got 15 to 11. This is shaping up to be a very interesting one right here. Adam Best, Matt Connor, I am Sterling Holmes. Fellas, how we doing?
Great. This is an awesome slate. Excited to dive in. One of these guys is actually in my top 5, so we'll leave a little bit of mystery there, but we'll find that out.
Yeah. 2 of my top 10 fell into this batch. I'm angry about it, which makes me ready to go.
This is juicy, just like Biggie Smalls. So let's get into it. Number 15, Otis Taylor. Chiefs legendary wide receiver Otis Taylor, but we all were fairly close on this one. Matt Connor had him at 16. I had him at 15. Patrick Allen, as well as you, Adam Best, had Otis Taylor at 14. Starting with you, Best. Otis Taylor.
Just a legend, It's a guy that my father talked about for decades and decades and decades as the greatest Chiefs receiver of all time until Tyreek Hill emerged on the scene. But he's still the leading wide receiver, not tight end, but wide receiver in terms of receiving yards in Kansas City Chiefs history. Quite the accomplishment. Was here for a long time. Just a big fan of his game, what I've seen. I mean, obviously I didn't live during the OT era, but the clips I've seen and the stories I've heard are epic. And really the only 2 guys ahead of him in receiving yards are the 2 guys in the GOAT conversation, along with Gronk, Travis Kelce, Tony Gonzalez. So what a career for Otis Taylor.
I think what's really interesting here is how much Otis was able to spread the field. He has a career average of 17.8 receiving yards per catch, led the entire league with 22.4, which was crazy. There was another year of 21.0 and then 19.5. So like in several of those years, he was approaching just a tremendous, he did that with volume work too. So it's not like, he caught 20 catches for 20 yards and that gave him, some weird NFL leading number. It was he was putting up 1,300 yards while also averaging 22.4 yards a catch. Those kind of metrics just proved he could not only catch in volume, but it set these distances with that way. 2-time All-Pro first team, 3-time Pro Bowler, finished second in MVP voting in 71. Obviously was a part of that championship team. Before, I think Dwayne Bowe started to get into the conversation of can he reach Otis's numbers? But really, he was the only true great wide receiver in Chiefs history until just 7 years ago, right? I mean, it's not like the Chiefs have a ton of great receivers, wideouts, in their history. And, he did it so long ago that he's had a legacy that has stood for a long time. Tony doesn't have a legacy that stood for a long time. There's no running back with the legacy that stood for a long time without someone else coming up in the conversation. And I think that's what makes Otis really something here. He made a big stamp on the team, and then no one else could really touch that until Tyreek.
I think it's pretty fun what Lynn Dawson said about Otis Taylor. Quote, Otis made my job easy. If you got the ball or you've got the pass to Otis, you knew he'd catch it. I think Mahomes would have liked throwing to Otis Taylor in that regard, right? He's going to catch the ball, not drop it. The Professional Football Researchers Association named Taylor to the PFRA Hall of Very Good class of 2006. Yeah, that's great. I know it's kind of a... I don't know how you determine that. Kind of sad, also very fun, but he is just that next tier down. But I quite frankly think that he should have had more run for the NFL Hall of Fame. I'm always a little surprised there wasn't more national Otis Taylor run. You're seeing a lot of Chiefs fans in Kansas City finally start trying to get that torch passed to the NFL Hall of Fame, saying, hey, no, take a look at Otis Taylor. He was a great, I know it was a long time ago, but this dude was legendary. Are you guys surprised at all there hasn't been more national talk of Otis Taylor, of being a Hall of Fame snub?
Yes and no. I think the hard thing about Otis Taylor is when you play on a team with that many stars, sometimes it bumps you down a little bit. So there's that issue. Also, he played during kind of a more run-heavy era. I don't know what he would have done if he played now in the modern game. He's kind of like a combination of Dwayne Bowe. You mentioned Dwayne Bowe and MVS. He's kind of like if you put those two in a lab and took out the best parts of both players. Pretty amazing player. And another amazing part of his story, 15th round draft pick, 15th round in the NFL. So
when we talk about like that anecdote about being in the Hall of Very Good and his placement here at number 15, it makes me wonder if you guys think that's kind of a good place for someone that you would describe in that way, or does that feel like too high or too low?
It's a good point there. Like, this almost feels like the Hall of Very Good in our Chiefs list. Like, once you crack the top 15, that's the Hall of Very Good. Then what would you say? The top 10 is the Hall of Fame. So maybe that is fair, Connor. That might be the best way of putting it. I guess part of me is also like, hey, this is the best Chiefs receiver of all time, again, prior to Tyreek Hill. And you can still make the case. You can still argue that it's Otis Taylor. And so you're sitting here going, well, I want a Chiefs wide receiver in the Hall of Fame. And that's what I think makes it a little tough as well. All right, let's get into number 14, one of my favorite players of all time. And that is the big man himself, Willie Roaf. Willie Roaf coming in at number 14. Matty C, you had him at 17. I had him at 14. Nailed it. Patrick had him at 13. Best, you had him at 13. Patrick, we'll not start with Patrick because he's not here. Matt Connor, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll just say this because I think something tells me that Adam Best is going to just have an awesome way to talk about Willie Roaf. But I'll just say this: 4 seasons. Four seasons. That's it. I mean, the guy already had a legacy cemented in the Big Easy, right? I mean, like, Willie Roaf was synonymous with Saints football. Everyone knew him there. He was, he could have been done. Even like he could have cut off his career before he ever arrived in KC. Then he comes to KC, only plays 4 seasons, and somehow is so great in those 4 years that the city feels like it can lay claim to him. Like, we don't do that with Joe Montana even. Like, even though Joe Montana came for only a couple seasons and he did great in those seasons, no one in Chiefs Kingdom is really going, hey, he's kind of part ours too, like he is the Niners. Like, no, we just kind of go, hey, we were lucky to get him after the Niners were done, and we enjoy it. But with Roaf, it's like, hey, you don't get to claim all of him. We get to claim him because he was so freaking dominant. It's really kind of rare when a player in a short stint does that and kind of has to create a new part of the legacy or a new part of the trophy case. To me, I think that's what speaks to Roaf the most is Casey's claim to him and his claim to Casey. Like, he loves KC too and talks openly about like, yeah, both places were meaningful and great. So yeah, it was a magical 4 years. That's for sure.
He had 4 All-Pros in his 4 years in Kansas City. 3 of them first team All-Pros. What's crazy too is not only is he an all 90s NFL all decades team, also the 2000s. He stopped playing in 2005. He retired in 2005. Carl Peterson was hoping that he was going to come back, and he was like, nah, man, I'm solid. Retirement's going to be fine for me. Nasty says I'm good. Great nickname, too, for an offensive lineman, Nasty. That's strong. But again, you are an all 2000s, all decades team, and you played 5 to 6 years in that decade. And again, the majority was in Kansas City. So while, yes, and I think that's the best point you made, was Joe Montana. Chiefs were lucky to have Joe Montana, but we don't necessarily claim him as a Chief. We're like, that was awesome, fantastic. We'll claim him as a couple of years, but we're not going to sit here and say and pretend and be like, yeah, you're also a Chief. No, he's a 49er first and foremost, and then a Chief. Willie Roaf, while yes, short period of time, it almost feels like he's more Chief than Saint, or at least 50-50, even with the lack of years as living here in Kansas City.
Here's the way I'd put it. He had 2 different Hall of Fame careers. The Saints have, as you know, they have a lot of claim to him too. He was arguably as good as any lineman in the league, or close, during that 8 or 9 years he was in New Orleans, and he came to Kansas City for 4 years. I thought he was the best tackle in the league, hands down, when he was in Kansas City. I thought he rose to that Anthony Munoz, Jonathan Ogden, Orlando Pace, like top 10 all-time tackle level play. He was performing at a level where you could have run the ball boy behind him and picked up 3 or 4 yards every time. You know, just unstoppable. And I don't want to take anything away from Priest Holmes, but my God, I mean, we've talked about it numerous times. This may be as good of any offensive line in the history of the league. And he was the anchor. I love Will Shields. I think he's fantastic. He's more Chief than Roaf, which is, I think you'll see that reflected in the rankings. That's all I'm going to say. But I think Willie Roaf was the best performer on that line, probably the best player on a team that included Tony Gonzalez, Priest Holmes, and numerous other stars.
What I find so fun is that Kansas City, and I've said this a long time now, I think Chiefs fans are uniquely positioned to appreciate offensive line and play in the trenches more than other teams. And part of that starts with obviously, Brian Waters, Will Shields, Casey Wigman, Alt, but Willie Roaf too. And that's what's so fun, I think, being a Chiefs fan now, is we can appreciate Mahomes and the greatness and Tyreek and Travis and Tony and Chris Jones. But we have always had I think, a unique appreciation of the offensive line because we know how important they are. And that's why we saw the Chiefs when they lost to the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. We're sitting there going, yeah, you can be the greatest quarterback in the world. You can be the greatest quarterback the world has ever seen. You can have a Tyreek Hill. You can have this, that, and the other, but it does not matter if the offensive line can't hold up. And that's why I think it's so fun being here in Kansas City and now watching Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith and Joe Tooney, and even Mitchell Schwartz to an extent. Like, I think if you're an offensive lineman, you would want to play in Kansas City. Yes, there are high expectations, but Kansas City is like the New York media for O-line. Like, if you're good, that's merely not enough. Like, if you're just merely good, you're going to get roasted. You're going to, if you're Orlando Brown Jr. and you're above average, sorry, you got to be better than that. If you're Jamaal Taylor and you're having all these penalties, but when you're not holding, you're a pretty damn good right tackle, sorry, you have to be better than that. Like, we're used to greatness, so you expect greatness. And that's why I think it's so fun. I think Kansas City is the New York media for offensive line. TM, trademark that.
Yeah, it's a town where our offensive line coach is a household name, Andy Heck. He really is. It's crazy.
Just ask Eric Fisher what it's like to live up to expectations. He made 2 Pro Bowls, held it down for almost a decade, and everyone's still kind of like, yeah, I wish maybe we chose someone else, as if there was anyone else in that draft, by the way. But hey, I'll say this, just so we don't skip over. 11 Pro Bowls, 4 first-team All-Pro, 5 second-team All-Pro. Dominance throughout his entire career. You said it, 2 decades worth of being on that list is unbelievable at a position where the fall is precipitous when you're done. Like holding down that blind side means you're going up against the very best. He was so good at it. He made the all rookie team in 93 and was still doing it at elite level all the way more than a decade in the business. There was no one like Willie Roaf. We love Willie Roaf. Another year or two, we just would have eaten it up. I'll say this too. Let me just throw this out there. For anyone who didn't see Willie Roaf and what that Chiefs line would be like, a few years ago, Brett Veach said about reorienting the front line in a vision of this line. He chased Trent Williams in a very, very public way, making no secret of it, saying, yeah, we'll pay. And then made an offer that made Trent think about it. And then Trent went back to San Fran and they matched it. And then his heart was in San Fran and he stayed in San Fran. But it's Trent Williams. I mean, Willie Roaf was and is Trent Williams, or Trent Williams is Willie Roaf in this generation. And the thought of him next to Tooney, next to Creed, next to Trey would have been the reiteration of this line and made everyone go, holy hell, has there ever been a line like this? And those older of us would have said, yes, there was. And it started on this left side.
Yeah, and then if someone almost like, let's go ahead and just throw it out there, Lane Johnson was the right tackle. Like, it was just all pros from left tackle to right tackle. It was, it was fun to watch. It was different. I won't trade that era for this one because I prefer watching Super Bowls being won. But as a kid growing up, it was a great insertion to the understanding of the importance of the offensive line. Again, it's why I love talking O-line, and it's all predicated because of watching these dudes up front play. All right, let's get into number 13. Now, this one is going to be a fun one for all of us. Maybe the most electric player who's ever donned a Kansas City Chiefs jersey, and that is Jamaal Charles. Jamaal Charles better be in the Hall of Fame, or I'm throwing hands. If Frank Gore gets in and Jamaal Charles doesn't, I am heading to Canton. I am going to scream. I'm going to picket. I will You know what? I'll do it. I will write a strongly worded letter because JC deserves it. Jamaal Charles, 13. Matt Connor, 6. I had him at 13. Patrick Allen at 16. And then Adam Best, 15. Let's start with you, Best. You were a little down on him. By the way, look at that. Nailed it again. 13. I had Otis Taylor, 15. Willie Roaf, 14. And JC, 13. I didn't know I had all the power, apparently.
Maybe you just went last.
I went second. All right. Jamaal Charles coming at 13, but 15 in Adam Best's heart, apparently. Adam Best, why 15 for JC?
If you know how I look at the running back position, 15 is very, very high for me. I just couldn't put him any higher, especially with the injuries and everything. And everyone knows about his highest yards per carry in NFL history. I don't think that tells the whole story. I think there are better stats like expected points added per rush since 2000. He blows away everybody. That's one of the stats. He blows away everybody. The other one is rushing yards over expected per rush. He clears 0.8. Nobody else clears 0.4. Each time he gets the ball, he's twice as good as everybody else. Literally twice as good as everybody else. That's how electric he was. Every time he touched the ball, it felt like he was ripping off 5 or 6 yards minimum. And it also felt like he could take it to the house. There's just never been a player like him in Kansas City. I don't know if there's ever really been a player like him in the league. If he played on a better team and stayed healthier, easy Hall of Fame case. I think he's in the Hall of Fame from our perspective, regardless, because he's got a case for the most efficient back of all time, up there with Jim Brown and Barry Sanders and the rest of those guys. So, you're right. For you to say that he might be the most electrifying player in Chiefs history, and this franchise is the franchise that drafted Patrick Mahomes, I mean, that is a hell of a compliment, but he was just that fun to watch.
What I find fun and funny to an extent is every team knew the Chiefs were going to JC, and he still was ripping off 5 yards, 6 yards, and was that efficient. Like, that blows my mind. Like, every single team knew that was a Chiefs game plan, and they still could not stop it. Like, if you're a DC, you're just going here like, what the freak? What are we supposed to do? We got 8 guys in the box. We don't think anyone on the outside is going to make a play. They can't throw the ball unless it's to Jamaal Charles. We have 3 spies on him. What are we doing here? How is he slithering through like a snake? It blew my mind. We all know that it was the Oakland game when he had, it was like 5 touchdowns. It was just... Jamaal Charles was, again, including Mahomes, the most electrifying player I have ever watched in my entire life. It's one of those few cases where like nerds are going for this. Like all the analytics community is like, yes, Jamaal Charles for the Hall of Fame. And then all like the old school football fans are like, longevity, give me Frank Gore. And I'm like, am I Miller Lite? Why not both? Like, it's both. Like, I can appreciate the greatness of Jamaal and also appreciate the longevity, which counts as greatness at a very physical sport and position of Frank Gore. Give me both, Frank Gore and JC for the Hall of Fame. Matty C.
I had him at number 6 because, and I know there's the injuries. I know that the body of work doesn't live up to some others because of that. In terms of like overall numbers, and we say a player's best ability is his availability and all that. But look, for a franchise, you just said it, for a franchise that's drafted Mahomes, to me, Jamaal Charles and even Tyreek Hill, and we'll get to this, these are 3 of the most dynamic players in NFL history. Not like in their generation, not in Chiefs franchise history, but somehow they've all existed within the same decade of one team. But I would put all 3 of those guys against almost anyone else who's ever played in the National Football League, just period. Hands, whatever generation, whatever the era, whatever the team, I think the Chiefs have somehow had an abundance of riches in this. Jamaal Charles was so electric, doing anything and everything all over the field. It was his vision, his agility, his quickness. He just had a whole other gear to go into. He could kind of grind it out and then surprise you by popping out of the pack. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I can't believe he didn't lose yardage there. And then suddenly he's like all the way down the field. He was the most exciting, I think maybe the most exciting player I've ever watched, just in terms of like, I'm watching, waiting for something to happen, and he makes that. It felt like anything was possible when watching him. It's the same thing when we watch Patrick doing his thing scrambling as a quarterback. And you're like, how could he do that? We talk about the potential of a behind the back pass this year. And we talked about the left-handed pass early on. And we talk about like all those things were the ways that we talked about Jamaal from the running back position. And so to me, I know that the injuries are there, but when watching him, I just thought there's not more than 5 guys in this team's history who have been better. And I know that the body of work has been greater for some. Just running back versus running back, he's better than Priest. He's better than Larry. He's better than Christian, which Mr. Okoye, I'm so sorry for even saying that, my favorite player of all time. He's light years beyond them all because he was just so incredibly gifted. I love his story coming out anyway, being a part of the Special Olympics and bringing so much attention to that, being a strong civic leader in that endeavor. Just an incredible player. I think for those who didn't really see him, or I guess you'd have to be a pretty relatively new fan for that. But I think history's going to bury him, and I hate it. I think history's going to bury him because of the lack of career numbers. And I don't know how to help his reputation stay alive like a Gale Sayers, but it needs to happen.
It's a great point, man. His star was as bright for a period as any running back, in my opinion, in probably NFL history. Being that electrifying and that efficient, that combination is very rare. You've had guys who've been great for a couple years. I don't. Chris Johnson, if you want to make the case for Chris Johnson, right, for the Titans, he was great for a couple of years, so phenomenal, but the longevity wasn't there. Similar to Jamaal, but Jamaal, I think, was even more so. There's just a rare breed of being that fun, taking risks, while also being efficient and understanding when to take those risks. It's almost like a kick returner. Dante Hall, I love Dante Hall, but sometimes he'd make some plays and you're like, oh, come on now. That was a little much, right? But with Jamaal, he seemingly would go, okay, I'll get the 4, but that 4 might turn into 40. It was very rare when he made a decision that you're like, oh, that was a poor decision that turned into -4. And you don't really have that with those boom or bust type of guys. He was boom, or also I'm going to have a high floor as well. That is very rare. Let's get into number 12. This one, there were a lot of back and forth for a number this low at number 12. There's going to be some spirited debate, apparently. We got Chris Jones, current player. Chris Jones coming in at number 12. Matt Connor. Apparently, you're not a fan of Arrowhead Addict's appearance of Chris Jones. I don't understand that. Of CJ95, you had him at 18. 18 for CJ95. I had him at 8. Patrick Allen had him at 17, and he cannot defend himself. So I'll take out all my anger on you, Matty C. And then Adam Best decided to go the complete other way and decided to put Chris Jones at number 4. I'll start with you, Best. You were the highest on Chris Jones, or lowest, however you wanted to determine this. You were the most bullish on Chris Jones, a man with a great bull rush. You had him at 4. Talk about CJ95.
I think I can back it up. He's the most underrated player in the league. He is, because of playing in the shadow of not only Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and to some extent Tyreek Hill, but Aaron Donald, probably the best defender along with Lawrence Taylor in NFL history. So that has caused him not to get the shine he deserves. But if you look at the past 5 years, he is the most doubled pass rusher in the NFL. Let's take last season, 2023. He got doubled 72% of the time. How much did Aaron Donald get doubled? 63% of the time. How much did Micah Parsons, the top edge, get doubled? He got doubled 35% of the time. So half as much as Chris Jones. And Chris Jones, during this period, he's averaged a 91 PFF grade. And if you look per year at his pass rush win rate, 2023, 11th, 2022, 5th, 2021, 10th, 2020, 4th, 2019, 10th. That's not among defensive tackles. That's among all pass rushers, despite him getting doubled more than anybody. He eats doubles for breakfast. He gets to the quarterback when it matters the most. His numbers actually get better, much better in the fourth quarter and over time. He has the intellect and the freedom and I guess the versatility to line up wherever he needs to line up across on the defensive line. He always pinpoints that mismatch. This is why I've been so passionate about Chris Jones and defended him so vocally during these contract disputes, because I think he is on track. And this may sound blasphemous to some, but I really believe it, to maybe become the best defensive player in franchise history, because he is still in his prime. He's got plenty of runway left. And if they put up another title or two, I love DT, but he is in the conversation. He's very much in the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's very, very possible. Needs a few more years. I always hated the knock against Chris Jones of, oh, that's great in the regular season, but do it in the playoffs. Well, he's getting double teamed all regular season long. What do you think teams are doing to them in the postseason? I would love to see the numbers of the percentage because it has to be just astronomical because you're not going to let Chris Jones beat you. You're going to make sure that he is the guy that does not beat you, and yet he is still finding ways without getting sacks a lot of times to make an impact. Against Josh Allen, against the Bills. Like, he is a game ender, even if it's not, again, going to show up in the box score. That's always my pushback. I don't mean to tell people how to fan or how to judge or watch the game, but I do think there's a little bit of a you don't know ball if all you're judging is on sacks. That's not a great way of doing it. Yes, you need to get the quarterback to the ground, but there's other ways to influence a game. It's why Trent McDuffie can be and L'Jarius Sneed can be an elite cornerback without getting interceptions. There's different ways of getting it done. Chris Jones gets it done in the playoffs. Again, even if it always isn't, credited with a sack. I couldn't go as high as 4. I think that was a little too strong for me. Best. Again, I had him at 8, which I thought was fair. But Matt Connor had him at 18, the lowest of any of the AA boys. Why Chris Jones at 18?
Man, when you frame it that way, it makes it sound like, why do I hate Chris Jones? And I don't. I've put him in my top 20 for the franchise. I think he's, I'd instantly label him one of the best defenders ever, 5-time Pro Bowler, 5-time All-Pro, either first or second team, obviously in his prime. And I wanted the Chiefs to re-sign him. So, I mean, Adam made such a great case. I don't have anything negative to say about him, so it's weird to I don't know why I didn't have him at 4. I think the body of work there is a thing, although I just did that with Jamaal Charles and said, you don't need the body of work. But yeah, I think you're right. And maybe the shadow of some of these things are in the way, like Aaron Donald is the conversation first, and then you get to Chris Jones, but it hasn't just been him over time. There's been others in that too. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think for me, there's been give me another season or 2, and I'm willing to talk about top 15, top 10. That said, the Chiefs, I think maybe the best way to view his future, the way the Chiefs have positioned themselves in terms of contract extensions for veterans who get pricey. We saw them trade Tyreek Hill. This is not what they do, re-upping a guy like Chris Jones. What they let L'Jarius Sneed go, they let Charvarius Ward go. They let these guys go and try to do what they can from the center or, through the draft or whatever. But re-signing him at the level they did speaks to, and they did just re-sign him for they didn't give him an extra year. They didn't restructure and even give him an extra 2 years. I mean, it's a long-term deal, big money, even after age 30. That tells you that this front office is looking at things the way Adam was, saying there's a lot of runway here. We don't think the precipice is coming. So, yeah, I believe he will get there, even for me and maybe some of the metrics that I was wanting to see if I have to list him long term. I probably would re-rank him higher in the end of his career if we were to redo this. But kind of where I'm at right now, and then looking at some of the other defensive guys, historic guys, I don't know. It's where I came out.
I'm going to defend Matt here because Joe Thuney, the best pass blocking guard in the NFL right now, is not on this list. He's 53rd. He just missed it. So it's really hard to rank some of these guys in the middle of what they're doing. But I like what you said about Tyreek Hill. The Chiefs had a clear choice between Tyreek Hill and Chris Jones. They picked Chris Jones.
Yeah.
They picked Chris Jones. They haven't re-signed him once. They've re-signed him twice. Yeah. They don't re-sign anybody. They re-signed him twice. So what does that tell you about what the Chiefs think of the CEO of Sack Nation about 95?
Yeah. Which takes us into number 11. Well, number 11 is Tyreek Hill, and Matt Connor had Tyreek at number 8. I had Tyreek at 12, Patrick at 9, and Best, you had Tyreek. Great call, by the way, at 12 as well. It seems like Best and myself agreed kind of with the Chris Jones, Tyreek situation. Matt Connor, you and Patrick agreed and where to place those two guys. I don't know if that's an offense-defense metric. If it was Tyreek was the best wide receiver clear-cut, or at least 1-2 in NFL history, while defensively, or Chiefs history, while defensively, you can make the case that Chris Jones maybe not 1-2 defensively in Chiefs history, although, again, I think Adam Best is laying out a fairly good argument. Best, I'll start with you here. Tyreek Hill, number 11 overall, number 12 on your list.
Yeah, if you look at his yards per route run during his 6 years in Kansas City, he had a 2.31 average. That puts him top 10, top 12 every single year. But I think that only tells part of the story, because he has more gravity than any player I've ever seen, any receiving option I've ever seen, save maybe Randy Moss. He pulls and stretches a defense vertically. And not only vertically, horizontally, he stretches and taxes a defense unlike any player I've ever seen, except maybe Randy Moss. And when that's the company you keep, it's him and Randy Moss as the greatest downfield weapons in NFL history, you have to have him top 10, top 12, somewhere in this territory. If he would have stuck with the Chiefs, he would have been higher. But the reason I have Chris Jones higher, since we're talking about both these guys still, is that the Chiefs have never won during this era a Super Bowl without Chris Jones. They have won, or Travis Kelce, and obviously Mahomes, but they've won 2 without Tyreek Hill. So he was, I think, an invaluable part of that Mahomes phase 1. I don't think Mahomes could have done it that first time without Tyreek, but when Mahomes kind of evolved and grew past needing a Tyreek, you've seen that some of these other guys might be a little bit more important to this era.
I think that was the best way of putting that. I could not agree more. It's maybe the first when they did need Tyreek, they clearly did not need him for the second and third championship. I think they needed Chris Jones. I think they needed to have the defensive presence of Chris Jones. Part of that's credit to Mahomes' greatness, right? Maybe it's not fair to place that all on Tyreek, because with any other quarterback, the Chiefs are not winning those Super Bowls. Mahomes is just that good, which, and then again, in part takes away from Tyreek Hill to an extent. But Hill was such a fun player to watch, and not just fun, efficient, electric, for the most part, great hands, besides his last year for some reason when he decided he wanted to drop some balls in like semi-contract year, which was a little interesting, but he still got paid. So I think he's okay. One of the smartest football IQ players I've ever seen. Okay, I'm saying football IQ. His football IQ is legitimately through the roof. Like, he always knew where to be. He knew the soft spots. He knew how to manipulate and beat a defense. He understood how to grow and develop as a wide receiver, starting off on special teams, working his way up. And then eventually it was like, okay, this guy's legit. Well, yeah, you can make the case that speed indicates you're physically gifted. He worked hard, working out, getting stronger. Point of attack, point of catch, point of contact. He understood that speed can only take you so far. You have to work harder to get to where you want to be one of the greats. And he was able to do that. I just always find that so impressive. And he created his own archetype, if you will. Everyone's always trying to find the next Tyreek Hill, right? It was this quarterback's Tom Brady, this quarterback's Rodgers, this quarterback's Mahomes, right? Wide receiver, it's now that there's a little people who are like, how can you find the next Tyreek? He's become his own genre of wide receiver, which how damn impressive is that?
And you'll see teams reach for Henry Ruggs or maybe even Jalen Waddle a little bit, just trying to replicate what Tyreek Hill brought to the Chiefs. And to Tyreek Hill's credit, we said that the Chiefs won Super Bowls without him. He's been very good in Miami. He's been arguably the best receiver in the NFL. So that's no knock on him. He's been all right without Patrick Mahomes. He's quarterback proof. That's how good he is. He was great with Alex Smith.
Look, when do you ever hear a 5'10", 185 wide receiver referenced as the best in football? You don't. When do you hear a guy who's 5'10", 185, 190 referenced as a physical contested catch winner? You don't. When does that same guy run 22 miles an hour in pads on the field? You don't. You don't. Look, my favorite anecdote about Tyreek Hill, we could quote his stats. We could say no receiver's ever had 1,700-yard seasons ever in NFL history. He's done it twice in a row now. We could say all these things, but my favorite anecdote, a few years ago, Sports Illustrated Peter King is hanging out with Sean Payton, says Sean Payton, who's the most dynamic offensive weapon offensive player in football right now. Sean Payton turns to Drew Brees, says, you tell him. Drew says, Tyreek Hill. Doesn't even miss a beat. Tyreek Hill. Then Sean just nods him. Yep. Like, we're not even talking about the Chiefs. We're not even talking about whatever. They're just talking about in general. And it's like, look, ask anyone who knows in any locker room who is the guy who is befuddling every single defensive coordinator in the game. You want to ask me, you want to ask any of my guys, because we're all going to tell you the same fucking thing. It's Tyreek Hill. It's Tyreek Hill. He'll take it anywhere from any time. It was one of the coolest things I've ever seen as a Chiefs fan, to watch a guy grow from gadget player, right? Scoring like what he scored, like 6 touchdowns each, like rushing and then returning and then receiving. Like he had all the, like, I think he had 9 scores his rookie year or something like that. And it came from all these different facets. And you're like, oh, they've got a well-rounded, they've got a little Dante Hall, a little blah, blah, blah. And then they turned to him and they said, we're taking you off returns, which at first you're like, are you stupid? You have like a new human joystick. What are you doing? And then they tasked him with, you're going to be full-time. You're going to learn the nuances of the position. You're going to get much stronger. You're going to track the ball like no one else. You're going to go up against safeties who are actually quite a bit bigger than you, and you're going to come down with it every time. And he did. So look, man, he made the metamorphosis that no one thought he could make. He's outlasted every other name that's been listed next to him, like Nuke, Julio, whoever else in his track. He's the guy still standing after AJ Green and others have kind of fallen off. He's the guy still putting up the yardage. He's doing more than ever in Miami. He's an all-time great, surefire Hall of Famer. I love him. I love him in every way.
And I think the best compliment you can give a player is, did they change the way the entire league played? And Tyreek Hill did that cover one, or that single high safety shit that the Legion of Boom did in Seattle, dead after Tyreek Hill, dead. Now the entire league is too high, limit explosive plays. And Mahomes gets credit for that too, but Tyreek Hill scared the league to such a degree that they changed the way they played defense.
Number 10 is a good one right now, right? Because we have 10 players left. This was 15 to 11 on the top 50 Chiefs of all time. Coming up to you next, 10 through 6.